I stood in my childhood bedroom at 2 in the morning, staring at my wedding vest, sliced cleanly down the middle. The fabric hung in two perfect halves from the hanger, the careful stitching destroyed by deliberate scissors. My father's words still echoed in my ears from an hour earlier. "You deserve it, son." Tomorrow I would marry Sarah, the woman who believed in me when my own family gave up. They thought I was still the failure who dropped out of college 10 years ago. They had no idea I had spent the last decade serving my country. They had no idea about the 2 silver stars waiting in my dress blues. Tomorrow, everything would change. The alarm buzzed at 5:30, but I had been awake for hours. My wedding day had arrived, and instead of excitement, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach that came from dealing with my family. I picked up the ruined vest again, running my fingers along the jagged cut. This was just the latest in a decade of disappointments they had inflicted on me. It started when I was 19 at the University of Colorado. Business school had seemed like the logical path, following my father David's footsteps in construction management. But the numbers never made sense, the theories felt hollow, and I failed 3 courses in my sophomore year. The day I walked out of Professor Anderson's economics class for the last time, I knew I was done pretending to be someone I wasn't. My father owned Thompson Construction, one of Denver's most successful building companies. My mother Patricia had been principal at Jefferson High School for 15 years. My brother Marcus was finishing his residency at Presbyterian Medical Center. I was the family disappointment, the one who couldn't hack college, the one who had no direction. What they didn't know was that the day I left university, I drove straight to the Navy recruitment office. I enlisted under my middle name, Edward Thompson, instead of Edward David Thompson. I wanted to earn my place without my family's influence or interference. I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own terms. The recruiter, Chief Petty Officer Williams, saw something in me that my family never did. "You've got the look of someone ready to serve something bigger than himself," he said. "The Navy can use that dedication." Sarah understood. I met her 3 years ago at a veteran support group in Virginia Beach. She was an Army nurse who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and she recognized the burden of keeping military service private from family. When I explained why I couldn't tell them yet, she nodded without judgment. "Some people need to see you succeed first," she said. "Then they'll believe you're capable of success." Now, as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I could hear my family moving around downstairs. They had arrived yesterday for the wedding, bringing their usual mixture of skepticism and barely concealed disappointment. My phone rang. Marcus's voice was sharp with morning irritation. "Edward, where did you even get the money for this wedding? Mom and Dad are worried you're in over your head financially." I had heard this question dozens of times. My family couldn't understand how someone without a real job could afford a wedding at the historic chapel of Williamsburg. What they didn't know was that my lieutenant commander's salary, combined with hazard pay from 2 deployments, had given me more financial stability than any of them realized. "I can handle it, Marcus. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, this whole thing looks like someone living in a fantasy world." I ended the call and checked my watch. 7 hours until the ceremony. Sarah would be getting ready with her bridesmaids at the inn across town. I had planned to spend the morning with my groomsmen, but first I needed coffee and distance from my family's doubts. My phone buzzed with a text from our wedding planner, Janet. "Emergency. Please call immediately." My heart sank as I dialed her number. "Edward, I'm so sorry, but I've had 3 vendors call this morning to cancel services. The florist, the bakery, and the string quartet all received calls yesterday claiming there were financial issues with payment." My blood turned cold. "What kind of calls?" "Someone identifying themselves as your father said there were concerns about your ability to pay, and they suggested the vendors protect themselves by canceling. I've been in this business 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." I closed my eyes and leaned against my bedroom wall. The cut vest was just the beginning. My family wasn't just disapproving of my choices anymore. They were actively sabotaging my wedding day. "Janet, all our payments are current, right?" "Absolutely. Your accounts are in perfect standing, but these vendors are spooked. I'm trying to reach them now to explain the situation, but some of them have already committed to other events." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, desperately trying to salvage the services that would make Sarah's day perfect. The florist agreed to reconsider after I provided bank statements proving my financial stability. The bakery had already sold our cake, but their sister location could provide a substitute. The string quartet was gone, replaced by a DJ who specialized in last-minute emergencies. Each phone call revealed the same story. Someone claiming to be my concerned father had contacted multiple vendors, warning them that I was financially unstable and living in a fantasy world where I couldn't distinguish between my dreams and reality. By 10 in the morning, I had restored most of our services, but the damage was clear. My family hadn't just cut my vest out of disappointment. They had orchestrated a campaign to destroy my wedding day entirely. Sarah arrived at my hotel room just after 10, her hair already styled in elegant curls that would support her grandmother's vintage headpiece. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. What happened? I explained the vendor cancellations, watching her expression shift from confusion to anger to something approaching disbelief. Your parents actually called our vendors to sabotage our wedding? It gets worse. They told the florist I had substance abuse issues. They told the bakery I had employment gaps that raised red flags about payment. They've been systematically destroying my reputation with anyone connected to today. Sarah sank into the chair by the window, her hands shaking slightly. Edward, this isn't normal family disapproval. This is deliberate cruelty. She was right, and I had been avoiding that truth for years. My family hadn't just given up on me when I left college. They had decided I was beyond redemption, and they were determined to prove it to everyone around me. What they didn't know was that their wayward son had become Lieutenant Commander Edward Thompson, one of the Navy's youngest intelligence officers, to earn early promotion to 04. While they thought I was drifting through life without purpose, I had been serving my country in ways I couldn't discuss, even with Sarah. My first deployment took me to the Persian Gulf, where our intelligence team identified a terrorist cell planning attacks on American naval vessels. The information I gathered led to the prevention of 3 separate bombing attempts, earning me a Bronze Star that I had never mentioned to my family. My second deployment was classified, but it involved working with Allied forces in Eastern Europe to track weapons shipments that could have destabilized an entire region. The mission succeeded beyond expectations, earning me a Navy Achievement Medal and a commendation that would have made any family proud. But my family didn't know any of this. They knew Edward the college dropout, Edward the disappointment, Edward who couldn't hold down a real job or explain where his money came from. Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you about my service record. She looked up, and I could see the trust in her eyes that had carried us through 3 years together. I've been recommended for promotion to commander. The ceremony is next week, and there's a decoration I haven't told you about yet. Before I could explain about the Navy Cross, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my Uncle Robert, my father's brother who lived in Colorado Springs. Edward, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Your dad called me last night with some concerns about your wedding. He said you've been telling people you're in the military, but he thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Is there something going on that your family should know about? I closed my eyes. The sabotage was spreading beyond our vendors to our extended family. Uncle Robert, I am in the military. I've been serving for 10 years. But your dad said there's no record of you anywhere. He said he checked. He checked under the wrong name. I enlisted as Edward Thompson, not Edward David Thompson. There was a long pause. Why would you hide that from your family? Because I wanted to prove myself first. I wanted to earn my rank and decorations before they could doubt my abilities. Another pause, longer this time. What rank? Lieutenant Commandé. I could hear my uncle exhale slowly. Edward, if that's true, why haven't you told them? Your father is convinced you're living in some kind of fantasy world. Because every time I try to share good news with this family, they find a way to tear it down. Look what they're doing to my wedding day. After I ended the call, Sarah reached across and took my hand. You can't keep protecting them from the truth anymore. They're not going to stop until they destroy everything good in your life. She was right, but the ingrained habit of protecting my family from their own prejudices was hard to break. I had spent 10 years proving myself in the military specifically because I knew they would doubt my ability to succeed at anything. My phone buzzed with another call. This time, it was my father. Edward, we need to talk before this wedding goes any further. About what, Dad? About this fantasy world you're living in. Son, Your mother and I are concerned about your mental health. These stories you're telling about having money, about being able to afford all this, about having some mysterious job that nobody can verify, we think you need help. I don't need help, Dad. I need you to stop sabotaging my wedding. We're not sabotaging anything. We're trying to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Sarah seems like a nice girl, but you're lying to her about who you are. That's not fair to either of you. I hung up and immediately called the chapel to make sure our ceremony time was still secure. The coordinator assured me everything was confirmed, but I could hear uncertainty in her voice. Has anyone from my family called you? I asked. Well, your father did call yesterday to ask some questions about your payment arrangements. He seemed very concerned about your financial situation. What did you tell him? I assured him that everything was in order, but he seemed to think there might be some misunderstanding about your ability to pay for the ceremony. Even our wedding venue was being poisoned by their doubts. I realized that Sarah was right. The only way to stop this was to reveal the truth they had been so determined to ignore. But first, I needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go to prove I was a failure. I decided to listen outside their hotel room door to hear what they were planning next. The conversation I overheard changed everything. Don't worry, my father was saying to someone on the phone. The wedding won't happen. We're making sure of that. He'll come crawling back home where he belongs, and then we can get him the help he needs. My mother's voice joined in. We've already planted enough doubt about his stability. By the time we're finished, everyone will see that this whole wedding is just another one of his delusions. I backed away from their door, my heart pounding. This wasn't disappointment or concern anymore. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my life because they couldn't accept that I had succeeded without their approval. 3 hours before the ceremony, I met Sarah at the chapel for our final walkthrough. The venue was beautiful, with afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows and white roses adorning every pew. This should have been a moment of pure happiness, but I could see the stress in Sarah's eyes. They're not going to stop, are they? She asked as we stood at the altar, where we would exchange vows. No. They're convinced that humiliating me publicly will somehow save me from myself. Edward, maybe it's time to stop protecting them. Maybe it's time to let them see who you really are. I had been wrestling with this decision for months. Military operational security had trained me to compartmentalize my life, to reveal information only on a need-to-know basis. But my family's sabotage was escalating beyond anything I had anticipated. If I reveal my service record, everything changes. They'll know I've been lying about my identity for 10 years. You haven't been lying. You've been serving your country while they've been tearing you down. There's a difference. Before I could respond, my family arrived at the chapel 2 hours early, along with several of our wedding guests. I watched from the vestry window as they began circulating among the early arrivals, their faces serious with concern. My mother approached Sarah's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Anderson, with the demeanor of someone sharing difficult but necessary information. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, she said, but we're very concerned about Edward's mental health. He's been having some issues with reality, and we're worried that Sarah doesn't understand the full situation. Dr. Anderson, a respected cardiologist, listened with the professional attention he gave to serious medical discussions. What kind of issues? He asked. He's been telling elaborate stories about having a military career, about having money and job stability that simply don't exist. We think he might be having some kind of breakdown, and we're worried about what this could mean for Sarah's future. I watched Sarah's father's expression change from polite attention to genuine concern. My family was systematically poisoning the well of support that should have carried us through our wedding day. My father was working the other side of the chapel, approaching members of our wedding party with similar conversations. I need to ask you something as Edward's father, he said to my best man, Jake, a fellow veteran who had served with me in the Gulf. Has he told you anything about his job or his military service? Jake, who knew exactly what my service record contained, looked confused by the question. Sir, Edward and I served together. He's one of the finest officers I've ever worked with. My father's expression tightened. Son, I don't know what Edward has told you, but there's no record of him ever serving in any branch of the military. We're concerned that he's been creating these elaborate stories to impress people. Jake's confusion deepened into something approaching anger. Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, I've seen Edward's service record. I've served alongside him on 2 deployments. I don't know what kind of family drama this is, but Edward's military service is not in question. I think you might be confused about who you served with, my father replied. Our son dropped out of college 10 years ago and has been drifting ever since. I realized my family had prepared for the possibility that some guests might contradict their narrative. They were ready to dismiss any evidence of my success as confusion or deliberate deception. My phone rang. Captain Rodriguez, my commanding officer from Norfolk Naval Base, was calling with news I had been expecting for weeks. Edward, congratulations. The promotion board has approved your advancement to commander, effective immediately. The ceremony is scheduled for next Friday. Thank you, sir. That's incredible news. There's more. The Navy Cross you were recommended for after the Baltic operation has been approved. They want to present it at your promotion ceremony. The Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat, awarded for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy action. It was recognition that most naval officers could only dream of receiving. Sir, I'm getting married this afternoon. Would it be possible to have the medal available for the ceremony? There are some family issues I need to resolve. Captain Rodriguez paused, then chuckled. Commander, if you need your dress whites and decorations to straighten out some family problems, I can have Lieutenant Johnson deliver them within the hour. That would be greatly appreciated, sir. After I ended the call, I found Sarah in the bride's preparation room, surrounded by her bridesmaids who were trying to maintain cheerful energy despite the toxic atmosphere my family had created. Sarah, I think it's time to stop hiding. She looked up from her makeup mirror, her eyes bright with determination. What do you need me to do? I need you to trust me for the next few hours. Things are about to change dramatically. I've trusted you for 3 years, Edward. I'm not stopping now. I kissed her forehead gently, careful not to disturb her makeup. When those chapel doors open and you see me standing at the altar, you're going to understand everything about why I kept this secret for so long. But first, I needed to deal with the latest escalation in my family's campaign of sabotage. My brother Marcus was in the chapel lobby, speaking earnestly with several wedding guests, including Sarah's college roommate and 2 of my groomsmen. I'm telling you this because I care about my brother, he was saying. Edward has been struggling with some psychological issues, and we're concerned that he's not being honest with Sarah about his situation. As a doctor, I feel obligated to speak up when I see someone potentially being deceived. The group listened with the serious attention that Marcus's medical degree commanded. He had always been the credible one in the family, the one whose word carried weight in any discussion. What kind of deception? Asked Tom, one of my groomsmen from college. He's been telling people he's a naval officer, that he has this distinguished military career. But there's absolutely no record of him ever serving anywhere. We think he might be experiencing some kind of dissociative disorder where he's created this entire alternate identity. Tom looked confused. But Marcus, I've seen photos of Edward in uniform. I've met other people who served with him. That's part of what makes this so concerning, Marcus replied smoothly. He's become very sophisticated at creating evidence to support these fantasies. We're worried about what else he might be lying about. I realized my family had prepared a comprehensive strategy to discredit not just my claims about military service, but any evidence that might contradict their narrative. They were painting me as someone so psychologically disturbed that I had created an elaborate false identity, complete with fake documentation and conspirators willing to support my delusions. The sophistication of their sabotage was breathtaking. They weren't just expressing disappointment anymore. They were systematically destroying my credibility with surgical precision. But what they didn't know was that in 1 hour, Lieutenant Johnson would arrive with my dress-white uniform, my commander's shoulder boards, and a ribbon rack that would tell the story of a decade of service they had refused to see. 1 hour before the ceremony, I could see the effect of my family's campaign in the faces of our wedding guests. Sarah's parents approached me in the chapel lobby, their expressions heavy with the kind of concern usually reserved for serious medical diagnoses. Edward, we need to have a conversation, Dr. Anderson said gently. Your family has shared some information with us that's very troubling. Mrs. Anderson, normally one of the warmest people I had ever met, looked at me with the careful sympathy reserved for someone who might be mentally unstable. Honey, we care about you, and we care about our daughter. If there are things we need to know about your situation, Now would be the time to share them. Several wedding guests were lingering nearby, clearly uncomfortable but unable to look away from what appeared to be a family intervention taking place in the chapel lobby. My father approached our small group, his face grave with paternal concern. "Dr. Anderson, I appreciate you taking the time to understand what we're dealing with here. As Edward's father, I feel responsible for not addressing this situation sooner." "What situation?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. "Son, we've been patient with these stories about military service and financial stability. But we can't let you start a marriage based on deceptions. Sarah deserves better than that." Dr. Anderson looked between my father and me with the analytical attention he brought to complex medical cases. "Edward, your father says there's no record of you serving in any branch of the military. He says you've been creating elaborate stories about a career that doesn't exist." Before I could respond, my mother joined the group, carrying a manila folder that she handed to Sarah's parents with the solemnity of someone presenting crucial evidence. "These are documents we've gathered over the past few months," she said. "We've been trying to help Edward, but the situation has gotten beyond what we can handle as a family." Dr. Anderson opened the folder and began reading documents that I couldn't see from my position. His expression grew more concerned with each page. "Edward, according to this, you've been receiving treatment for psychiatric issues related to identity confusion and reality dissociation." My blood turned cold. "What documents are those?" My mother's voice was thick with manufactured emotion. "Honey, Dr. Peterson has been working with you for months. Don't you remember the sessions where you talked about creating these military fantasies as a way to cope with your feelings of failure?" I stared at the papers in Dr. Anderson's hands, realizing that my family had gone beyond sabotage into outright fraud. They had created fake medical records to support their narrative that I was psychologically disturbed. "Those documents are forgeries," I said quietly. "Edward," my father said with the patient tone used for reasoning with someone who was dangerously delusional, "Dr. Peterson is a real doctor. We can call his office right now to verify his treatment recommendations." I realized they had thought of everything. They had probably found a real psychiatrist willing to participate in their deception, or they had created such sophisticated forgeries that verifying them would take more time than we had before the ceremony. Several more wedding guests had gathered in the lobby, drawn by the obvious tension of a family crisis unfolding in public. Sarah's college friends whispered among themselves, their faces reflecting the growing conviction that they were witnessing someone having a psychological breakdown. My brother Marcus stepped forward with the authority his medical training provided. "As a physician, I have to say that what we're seeing here is consistent with someone experiencing a severe dissociative episode. Edward genuinely believes these stories about military service. He's not consciously lying, but he's lost the ability to distinguish between his fantasies and reality." Tom, my groomsman, looked completely confused by the competing narratives. "But I've met people who say they served with Edward." "Are you saying they're all lying?" "We're saying that Edward is very convincing," my mother replied. "He's drawn other people into supporting these fantasies, either because they care about him or because they've been deceived too." I watched our wedding guests absorbing this explanation, seeing their expressions shift from confusion to the kind of sympathetic concern reserved for someone who was seriously mentally ill. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Whatever they're saying about you, I don't believe a word of it. I love you, and I'll stand beside you, no matter what." But I could see that even Sarah's bridesmaids were beginning to question what they thought they knew about me. The scope of my family's deception was overwhelming everyone's ability to process what was really happening. My father made one final public appeal to the gathering crowd. "We think the kindest thing for everyone would be to postpone this ceremony until Edward can get the help he needs. Sarah doesn't deserve to start a marriage under these circumstances." Several wedding guests nodded in agreement. The fake medical documents, combined with my family's apparent concern and my brother's professional opinion, had created a compelling narrative that I was too psychologically disturbed to make rational decisions about my own life. I realized that in a few minutes, I would either reveal the truth about my military service or watch my family succeed in destroying my marriage before it began. But before I could make that decision, my mother delivered one final devastating blow. She approached Sarah's parents with another set of documents, her voice breaking with apparent emotion. "There's one more thing you need to know. Edward was briefly institutionalized 6 months ago after a severe episode where he became convinced that he was receiving military awards for combat service that never happened. Dr. Peterson felt that the delusions had become dangerous to Edward's safety. She handed Dr. Anderson what appeared to be hospital admission records, complete with official letterhead and medical terminology that would be convincing to anyone without time to verify their authenticity. The doctors were concerned that he might harm himself or others if the fantasies continued to escalate. They recommended supervised care and medication, but Edward refused to continue treatment. I stared at my mother in complete disbelief. She had just accused me of being not only mentally ill, but potentially dangerous. The wedding guests who had been showing sympathetic concern now looked at me with the wariness reserved for someone who might be unstable enough to cause harm. Sarah burst through the bride's preparation room door, still in her robe but with her hair and makeup complete. "That's enough," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded medical teams in combat zones. "I don't know what kind of sick game this family is playing. But it ends now." My mother turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, honey, we're trying to protect you. Edward needs help, and we're worried about what might happen if this delusion is allowed to continue." Sarah looked at the fake documents in Dr. Anderson's hands, then looked directly at my family. "You want to know about Edward's military service? You want to know about his psychological stability? You want to know about his character and his honor?" She pulled out her phone and began making a call. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling about Lieutenant Commander Edward Thompson. Yes, I know you don't normally verify service records, but there's an emergency situation involving family members who are claiming he's never served." The chapel lobby fell completely silent as Sarah put the call on speaker. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through clearly. "Miss Mitchell, I can confirm that Lieutenant Commander Thompson is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to command. His service record is exemplary, and he's been recommended for promotion to commander effective next week." My family's faces went white as the implications of what they had just heard began to sink in. But Sarah wasn't finished. "Captain, can you also confirm that Edward has been awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat?" "Yes, ma'am. The award ceremony is scheduled for next Friday. It's one of the highest honors our service can bestow." The fake documents in Dr. Anderson's hands suddenly looked like what they were: elaborate lies created by people who were willing to destroy their own son's reputation rather than admit they had been wrong about his capabilities. But even as the truth was being revealed, I could see my father's face hardening with determination. They had gone too far to retreat now. "That's impossible," he said loudly. "We checked every military database. There's no record of Edward ever serving anywhere." Captain Rodriguez's voice was crisp with military authority. "Sir, Lieutenant Commander Thompson's service record is classified at certain levels due to the nature of his intelligence work. What I can tell you is that he has served with distinction for 10 years and has earned the respect of every officer who has worked with him. I watched my family's elaborate deception crumble in real time, but I knew they weren't going to surrender easily. They had invested too much in proving I was a failure to simply accept that they had been wrong." The wedding guests were now looking at my family with the same suspicion they had been directing at me moments earlier. The fake documents, the claims about mental illness, the systematic sabotage of our wedding day, all of it was being revealed as a malicious campaign by parents who preferred to believe their son was insane rather than successful. Lieutenant Johnson chose that moment to arrive with my dress-white uniform and decorations. "Lieutenant Commander Thompson?" he called from the chapel entrance. I walked over to receive the garment bag that would contain the final proof of everything my family had tried to deny. "Sir, Captain Rodriguez asked me to tell you that the entire command staff sends their congratulations on your promotion and commendations. He also said to tell you that if your family needs any further verification of your service record, they're welcome to contact the Pentagon directly." As I took the uniform, I could feel the weight of 10 years of hidden truth finally ready to be revealed. The chapel doors were about to open, and my family was about to learn exactly who Edward Thompson had become while they were busy trying to prove he was nothing. 30 minutes before the ceremony, I stood in the chapel vestry, holding my dress white uniform, while my family's world collapsed around them. The fake documents lay scattered on a side table, where Dr. Anderson had dropped them after Captain Rodriguez's call, their deception now obvious to everyone who had witnessed the conversation. My father was making desperate phone calls, trying to salvage some credibility from the wreckage of their sabotage campaign. Yes, this is David Thompson. I need to verify some information about my son's military service. What do you mean you can't discuss classified personnel records? I'm his father. I understand you have protocols, but there's been some kind of mistake. I called Lieutenant Johnson aside and quietly explained the situation. Sir, with respect, it sounds like your family needs a comprehensive education about what you've been doing for the Navy, he said. Would it be helpful if some of your fellow officers joined this conversation? Actually, Lieutenant, it would be helpful if you could contact some of the people who can speak to my service record without violating security protocols. Within 15 minutes, my phone was ringing with calls from people I had served with over the past decade. The first call came from Admiral Patricia Hayes, who had overseen my promotion to Lieutenant Commander. Edward, Lieutenant Johnson explained the situation. I'm calling to offer my personal testimony about your service record. Would it be helpful if I spoke to your family directly? I handed the phone to my father, who had been insisting to anyone who would listen that the Navy was part of some elaborate conspiracy to support my supposed delusions. This is Admiral Hayes, United States Navy, came the crisp voice through the phone. I understand you have questions about Lieutenant Commander Thompson's service record. My father's voice was weak as he responded. Admiral, we've been told our son has been serving in the Navy for 10 years, but we have no record of him ever enlisting. Mr. Thompson, your son enlisted under his middle name to avoid any appearance of seeking special treatment due to family connections. He has served with extraordinary distinction in naval intelligence, including classified operations that I cannot discuss with civilians. But why wouldn't he tell his family? Sir, based on what Lieutenant Johnson has described about your family's response to his wedding, I would say Lieutenant Commander Thompson showed excellent judgment in keeping his service record private until he was ready to share it. I watched my father's face as the full weight of what Admiral Hayes was saying began to sink in. For 10 years, they had been criticizing me for being directionless and unsuccessful, while I was actually serving my country at the highest levels of naval intelligence. My mother was sitting in a chapel pew, staring at the fake medical records she had created, apparently realizing for the first time the enormity of what she had attempted to do to her own son. Marcus approached me as I was preparing to change into my dress uniform. Edward, I need to understand something. If you've really been in the Navy all this time, why did you let us think you were failing at everything? Because every time I tried to share good news with this family, you found a way to tear it down. I needed to prove myself completely before I could trust you with the truth. But we're your family. We would have supported you. I gestured toward the fake documents on the table. Marcus, 2 hours ago you were telling our wedding guests that I was psychologically disturbed and potentially dangerous. You created false medical records to convince people I was institutionalized. Does that sound like family support? My brother's face flushed with shame as he realized what he had participated in. We thought we were protecting you from making a terrible mistake. You thought you were protecting your image of me as a failure. There's a difference. Sarah appeared beside me, radiant in her wedding gown and veil, but with steel in her eyes as she looked at my family. Edward, your guests are ready. Your groomsmen are in position, and Lieutenant Johnson has arranged for some of your fellow officers to be present for the ceremony. I looked through the vestry window and saw that several naval officers in dress uniforms had taken seats in the chapel. Word had apparently spread through the Norfolk Naval Base community that one of their own was getting married and needed support in dealing with family issues. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the recruiter who had first recognized my potential 10 years ago, was seated in the front row. Commander Sandra Torres, who had recommended me for the Navy Cross, was there with her husband. Lieutenant Commander Michael Chen, who had served with me in the Persian Gulf, had driven 3 hours from Washington, D.C. to be present. Sarah, are you ready for this? Once I walk down that aisle in dress whites with my full ribbon rack, everything changes permanently. Edward, I've been ready for this for 3 years. The only question is whether your family is ready to see who you really are. I began changing into my dress uniform, carefully pinning each ribbon and decoration in its proper position. The Bronze Star from my first deployment. The Navy Achievement Medal from classified operations in Eastern Europe. The Purple Heart from an incident I had never discussed with anyone outside my chain of command. And, at the top, the ribbon that represented the Navy Cross I would receive next week. Lieutenant Johnson helped me adjust my shoulder boards with the 2 silver stars that indicated my rank as Lieutenant Commander. Sir, when you walk out there, every person in that chapel is going to understand exactly who you are and what you've accomplished, he said. Some families struggle with having a son who's achieved more than they expected. As I prepared to leave the vestry, my phone rang with one more call that would change everything. Captain Rodriguez was calling with news I hadn't expected. Edward, I've been in contact with Admiral Morrison at the Pentagon. Given the circumstances Lieutenant Johnson described, they've decided to accelerate your promotion ceremony. Admiral Morrison is driving down from Washington to present your commander's shoulder boards and Navy Cross at your wedding reception, if you're willing to have it done publicly. I nearly dropped the phone. Sir, that would be incredible, but I don't want to turn our wedding into a military ceremony. Commander, after what your family put you through today, I think they need to understand the full scope of what you've achieved. Admiral Morrison agrees. He said it's time for your family to see exactly who they've been trying to tear down. As I hung up the phone, I realized that in a few minutes, I would walk down that chapel aisle as Lieutenant Commander Edward Thompson, and by the end of the evening, I would be Commander Edward Thompson, recipient of the Navy Cross. My family had spent months trying to prove I was a failure who lived in fantasy. They were about to discover that their fantasies about my failures were the only delusions in the room. The chapel doors were about to open, and 10 years of hidden truth were about to be revealed to everyone who had ever doubted what Edward Thompson was capable of achieving. The chapel doors opened, and I stepped into the afternoon sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. My dress-white uniform was immaculate, the gold buttons reflecting light as I moved toward the altar where Sarah waited. The 2 silver stars on my shoulder boards caught every eye in the chapel. But it was the ribbon rack on my chest that told the real story. Sarah's intake of breath was audible even from the back of the chapel. Her hands went to her heart as she took in the full display of decorations that represented 10 years of service she had known about, but never seen displayed in their complete glory. The wedding guests rose to their feet, but not in the traditional gesture of respect for a bride's entrance. They stood in recognition of something they had never expected to see, the transformation of someone they thought they knew into someone none of them had imagined. My ribbon rack told a story of extraordinary service. The Navy Cross ribbon at the top, representing heroism in combat that few officers ever experience. The Bronze Star with Valor device, indicating exceptional courage under enemy fire. The Purple Heart, marking wounds received in service to country. The Navy Achievement Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon, the National Defense Service Medal, and others that marked a decade of distinguished service in naval intelligence. Commander Sandra Torres, seated with the other naval officers, stood and began a slow salute that was immediately picked up by every military person in the chapel. Chief Petty Officer Williams had tears in his eyes as he recognized the young man he had recruited 10 years ago, now wearing the decorations of one of the Navy's most distinguished junior officers. But it was my family's reaction that defined the moment. My father's confident expression had evaporated completely. He stared at my uniform with the look of someone trying to reconcile 2 completely incompatible realities. For months, he had been telling people that I lived in fantasies about military service. Now he was looking at physical evidence of achievements that exceeded anything he had ever accomplished in his own career. My mother sat in stunned silence, her hands covering her mouth as she began to understand the magnitude of what she had tried to destroy. The fake medical records that had described me as dangerously delusional lay forgotten in her lap, their lies now obvious to everyone who could see the truth displayed on my uniform. Marcus looked like someone who had just witnessed a magic trick that defied all logical explanation. As a doctor, he understood the significance of military decorations. The Navy Cross alone indicated a level of heroism that most people only read about in history books. "Holy hell," he whispered, his voice carrying across the silent chapel. "Look at his ribbons." The wedding guests followed his gaze to my chest, where the ribbon rack told the story of a man who had served his country with extraordinary distinction, while his own family had been systematically trying to prove he was a failure. Dr. Anderson, who had been ready to postpone the wedding based on fake medical records an hour earlier, now looked at me with the respect due to someone who had clearly demonstrated courage and competence at the highest levels. Sarah began walking down the aisle, her face radiant with pride and love. She had known about my service record, but seeing it displayed publicly while surrounded by fellow officers and family who had finally learned the truth was overwhelming for both of us. As she reached the altar, she whispered, "I am so proud of you." The chaplain, Navy Commander Michael Reeves, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. He had volunteered to officiate when he learned that one of his fellow officers needed support in dealing with family issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to witness the marriage of Lieutenant Commander Edward Thompson and Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary service record of the groom, who has brought honor to his country and his uniform through a decade of distinguished service in naval intelligence. The congregation remained standing as Commander Reeves continued. Lieutenant Commander Thompson has served with valor in multiple combat zones, earning decorations that reflect the highest traditions of naval service. His commitment to duty, honor, and country exemplifies the values we hope to see in all who wear the uniform. I could see my parents trying to process what they were hearing. The son they had dismissed as a failure was being publicly honored by a naval chaplain for achievements they had never imagined possible. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. The chapel doors opened again, and Admiral Richard Morrison entered in full dress uniform, accompanied by 2 aides carrying official Navy documents. The congregation turned to see what was happening, and the naval officers present immediately came to attention. Admiral Morrison walked down the aisle to where I stood beside Sarah, his expression serious but warm. "Lieutenant Commander Thompson, I apologize for interrupting your wedding ceremony, but there are some matters of military protocol that cannot wait." He turned to address the congregation directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Admiral Morrison from the Pentagon. I have driven here today to present Lieutenant Commander Thompson with decorations that represent some of the finest service our Navy has seen in recent years." Sarah stepped aside as Admiral Morrison's aide opened a presentation case containing the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor in combat. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces during classified operations in the Baltic region, where your actions directly prevented the loss of Allied vessels and personnel, I present you with the Navy Cross. The silence in the chapel was absolute, as Admiral Morrison pinned the decoration to my uniform. My family watched in stunned disbelief as I received one of the military's highest honors at my own wedding ceremony. Furthermore, Admiral Morrison continued, "By order of the Chief of Naval Operations, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Commander, effective immediately." Lieutenant Johnson stepped forward with new shoulder boards bearing the eagle and silver star of a full commander. As Admiral Morrison replaced my Lieutenant Commander insignia, I realized I was being promoted from 04 to 05 inches front of everyone who had ever doubted my capabilities. "Commander Thompson, your service to our nation has been exemplary. Your courage in combat, your intelligence work in sensitive areas, and your dedication to duty represent the finest traditions of naval service." The naval officers in the congregation burst into applause, followed immediately by the civilian guests, who were beginning to understand the significance of what they were witnessing. My father sat with his head in his hands, apparently overwhelmed by the realization of what he had tried to destroy. My mother was crying, but whether from shame, pride, or shock, I couldn't tell. Sarah took my hand, as Admiral Morrison stepped back, her eyes bright with tears of pride. "Commander Thompson," she said with a smile that lit up the entire chapel, "I think we can proceed with our wedding now." The transformation was complete. In the space of 10 minutes, I had gone from being dismissed as a delusional failure to being publicly honored as one of the Navy's most distinguished officers. My family's faces were white with the realization of what they had attempted to do, and what they had nearly succeeded in destroying through their campaign of sabotage and deception. But the ceremony was just beginning, and the full reckoning was yet to come. Commander Reeves resumed the wedding ceremony with the authority of someone who understood that we had just witnessed something extraordinary. The chapel was filled with an energy that went beyond typical wedding joy. There was a sense of justice being served, of truth finally being revealed after years of deception. "Commander Thompson and Miss Mitchell," he began, "you have chosen to exchange vows in the presence of family, friends, and fellow service members who represent the values of honor, courage, and commitment that defined both military service and marriage. As we exchanged rings, I could see my family slowly beginning to comprehend the full scope of what they had tried to destroy. My father kept looking at the naval officers in the congregation, men and women whose respect I had clearly earned through actions they had never known about. Sarah's vows were beautiful and heartfelt, acknowledging not just our love but the courage it had taken for me to serve my country while protecting my family from their own prejudices. "Edward, you have shown me what it means to serve something greater than yourself," she said. "You have demonstrated honor in the face of doubt, courage in the face of danger, and love in the face of betrayal. I promise to stand beside you as you continue to serve our country and our family with the same dedication you have shown for the past 10 years. My own vows focused on the future we would build together, grounded in the truth that was finally being revealed. Sarah, you believed in me when I couldn't tell you why you should. You trusted me when I couldn't explain what I was doing or where I was going. You saw my worth when my own family couldn't. I promise to be worthy of that faith for the rest of our lives." As Commander Reeves pronounced us husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause that seemed to shake the stained glass windows. The naval officers stood and saluted as Sarah and I kissed, while the civilian guests clapped with an enthusiasm that reflected their amazement at what they had witnessed. The reception was held in the garden behind the chapel, where Admiral Morrison had arranged for a small promotion ceremony to formally present my new rank and decorations. My family stood at the edge of the gathering, clearly uncertain about their role in celebrating achievements they had spent months trying to disprove. Chief Petty Officer Williams approached my parents during the cocktail hour, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'm the recruiter who signed your son up 10 years ago. I want you to know that in 30 years of military service, I've rarely seen a young man with more potential or dedication. Edward has exceeded every expectation I had for him." My father's voice was barely audible. "We didn't know." "Sir, with respect, you didn't want to know. Edward tried to tell you about his achievements over the years, but you were so invested in seeing him as a failure that you couldn't recognize his success when it was right in front of you." Commander Torres joined the conversation, her ribbon rack equally impressive as my own. "Mr. Thompson, your son saved my life during our deployment in the Gulf. The intelligence he gathered prevented 3 separate attacks on American vessels. Every sailor who came home from that deployment owes Edward a debt we can never repay." My mother finally found her voice. "Why didn't he tell us?" "Ma'am," Commander Torres replied, "from what I understand about your family's reaction to his wedding, Edward showed excellent judgment in keeping his service record private. Military families support their service members. What you've done today isn't support, it's sabotage." I could see my family beginning to understand not just what I had achieved, but what they had nearly destroyed through their campaign of deception and manipulation. During the dinner, Admiral Morrison stood to make a toast that served as both celebration and reckoning. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we have witnessed something remarkable. We have seen a young officer who has served his country with extraordinary distinction, despite receiving no support or recognition from those who should have been his strongest advocates." The Admiral's eyes moved to my family's table. "Commander Thompson has earned the respect and admiration of everyone who has served with him. He has demonstrated courage in combat, intelligence in complex operations, and leadership that has saved American lives. These achievements were earned without fanfare, without family support, and apparently without family knowledge." My father looked like he wanted to disappear beneath the table. But today, we also witnessed something equally remarkable. We saw a family learn the truth about someone they thought they knew. And we saw the beginning of what I hope will be a new understanding between them. After the formal presentations, I found myself alone with my family for the first time since the ceremony. The weight of everything that had happened hung between us like a physical presence. My father was the first to speak, his voice heavy with shame. "Edward, I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give. We nearly destroyed the most important day of your life because we couldn't accept that you had succeeded beyond anything we ever imagined. Dad, you did more than try to destroy my wedding. You created fake medical records claiming I was institutionalized. You told vendors I was financially unstable. You systematically tried to convince everyone I know that I was psychologically disturbed. That goes far beyond disappointment or concern." My mother was crying openly now, the full weight of what she had attempted finally hitting her. I thought we were protecting you from making a mistake. I thought Sarah was being deceived by someone who was living in fantasies. Mom, the only person living in fantasies was you. You created an entire false narrative about who I am, rather than accept that I had found my own path to success. Marcus stepped forward, his face etched with guilt. Edward, as a doctor, I should have known better than to participate in this. I let my competitive feelings about your success override my professional judgment. I'm ashamed of what we did today. The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. My family had to confront the reality that their own prejudices and need for control had nearly destroyed their relationship with me permanently. The truth is, I told them, I've been successful for 10 years while you've been criticizing me for being a failure. I've served my country with honor while you've been questioning my character. I've built a career that any family would be proud of while you've been telling people I was unemployable. My father looked at the Navy Cross on my uniform, his expression reflecting the magnitude of what he was finally understanding. How do we fix this, son? You start by understanding that I don't need your approval to be successful. I don't need your permission to make good choices. And I don't need your validation to know my own worth. What I need is for you to accept that I am capable of making decisions about my own life. Sarah joined our conversation, her presence bringing a sense of calm authority to the emotional discussion. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Edward has protected you from the truth about your behavior for years. He could have embarrassed you publicly by revealing his achievements and contrasting them with your criticism. Instead, he kept serving quietly while enduring your doubts. That shows more grace than most people would have managed. Over the following hours, my family began the difficult process of reconciling their image of me as a failure with the reality of my achievements. It wasn't easy for any of us, but it was necessary. The evening ended with Admiral Morrison pulling me aside for a private conversation. Commander, your family owes you several lifetimes of apologies for what they put you through. But I want you to know that your fellow officers have nothing but respect for how you handled this situation. You kept your operational security, you protected your family from their own prejudices, and you served with distinction despite having no support from home. Thank you, sir. It means everything to have that recognition from people who understand what service requires. One more thing, Commander. Your next assignment is going to be at the Pentagon, working directly with the Joint Chiefs on intelligence coordination. It's a position usually reserved for officers with much more seniority, but your record speaks for itself. As Sarah and I left for our honeymoon the next morning, I reflected on what the last 24 hours had taught me about family, truth, and the courage required to stay true to your values when everyone around you doubts your worth. My parents called that evening to apologize again and to ask if they could frame a photo of me in my dress whites with the Navy Cross. It was a small gesture, but it represented their first step toward accepting who I had become instead of mourning who they thought I should be. The lesson that emerged from that chaotic wedding day stayed with me for years afterward. Your worth isn't determined by others' expectations, even family. Sometimes the people who should believe in you most will be the ones who doubt you loudest. But when you stay true to your values, serve something greater than yourself, and find someone who sees your real worth, their doubt becomes irrelevant. Real strength isn't proving yourself to those who refuse to see you, it's building a life with those who do. And sometimes, the uniform you earn through sacrifice speaks louder than any words of doubt ever could. Sarah and I built our marriage on the foundation of mutual respect and shared values that had carried us through that difficult day. My family learned to accept my choices and eventually became proud of the path I had chosen. And the Navy continued to provide opportunities for service that fulfilled me in ways I had never expected when I first walked into that recruitment office 10 years earlier. The fake documents my family had created were quietly disposed of. But the real documents, my promotion orders, my citation for the Navy Cross, the letters of commendation from superior officers, those took their place on our mantelpiece as a reminder that truth always emerges, even when it takes years to be revealed. Most importantly, I learned that day that courage isn't just about facing enemy fire or completing dangerous missions. Sometimes the greatest courage is required to reveal your true self to people who have invested years in believing you are something else entirely. The boy who had dropped out of college had become Commander Edward Thompson, decorated naval officer, devoted husband, and living proof that your family's doubts about your potential say more about their limitations than they do about your capabilities. And sometimes, when the chapel doors open and your family sees you standing there in dress whites with the decorations you've earned through a decade of hidden service, their faces going white with shock, is the sweetest justice of all. What moments in your own life have required you to choose between protecting others' feelings and revealing your true worth? Have you ever had to prove yourself to family members who refuse to see your potential? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about times when you had to stand up for your own achievements despite others' doubts. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with anyone who has ever felt underestimated by the people who should believe in them most. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't measured by others' ability to see it. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let their blindness define your reality.